Hello and welcome. You've landed on Zero Limits Living. I'm Dr. Joe Vitale. Every week I bring you inspiration and information to transform your life. And I'm very excited about this week because we're going to deep dive into the science behind a lot of things people have been talking about, dreaming about, and hoping were actually true. Now, before we go there, I want to thank you. I want to thank you because this show is very young, it's very new, and it's already so popular. It's being seen or heard on 1,000 different platforms across the galaxy. And that includes Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire, YouTube, obviously. So many places I can't name them all. I'm also putting all the episodes in one place, ZeroLimitsLivingTV.com. So you can go sit on the sofa and binge there, ZeroLimitsLivingTV.com. You can also sign up there to be notified whenever there's a new episode because there's a new one every Friday. Also, people often ask me, how do you speed up transformation? How do you get to the fast lane of zero limits living? And what I learned is that coaching is really the number one way in my experience to do it. And coaching is what changed my life. I still use coaches today. 20 years ago, I started a coaching program called Miracles Coaching. Miracles Coaching is proven. It's tested, it's trademarked, it's a system that works. But don't take my word for it. Go to miraclescoaching.com, fill out the application, get a 45-minute free consultation, check it out, see if it's right for you, and then make a decision. That said, let's move into today's incredible episode. My guest is a world authority on the science of creation and healing and alternative medicine. And I'm going to read his bio, and I already got chills as I'm getting ready to read the bio. Dr. Dawson Church is an award-winning science writer with 3 best-selling books to his credit. The Genie in Your Genes was the first book to demonstrate that emotions drive gene expression. Mind to Matter showed that the brain creates much of what we think of as objective reality. Bliss Brain demonstrates that peak mental states rapidly remodel the brain for happiness. Dawson has conducted dozens of clinical trials and founded the National Institute for Integrative Healthcare to promote groundbreaking new treatments. Its largest program, the Veteran Stress Project, has offered free treatment to over 20,000 veterans with PTSD over the past decade. Dawson shares how to apply these health and performance breakthroughs through EFT Universe, one of the largest alternative medicine sites on the web. That's EFTuniverse.com. I went there earlier today, and my God, I was overwhelmed. But the coolest thing there, Dawson, the coolest thing was you have a free meditation, the eco meditation, which in the midst of me being overwhelmed by all of your books, all of your science, all of your website and everything, I stopped and I did the meditation. You know what happened?
Tell me.
Bliss. I relaxed. Everything kind of went away. I was like, oh, I'm back in the moment. All is well. Yeah. So, Dawson, I'm jumping right into this, but thank you. It is a big honor to have you here. A big favor to me. Big treat for everybody that's here. This is fantastic. Thank you for making time.
Oh, such a pleasure, Dr. Joe. And those kinds of states are available to anyone. So I'm glad you're spreading the word.
Oh, we're going to promote the website again. And you're actually even giving away your book, which made me upset because I bought it.
Yeah, you can afford it, Joe.
And I'm kidding. I went to Amazon and I got Mind to Matter, and I already had a hardcover copy, but I couldn't find it in my move, so I bought the paper. But you have a website, mindtomatter.com, and you're giving away the book for the price of shipping to help people get on the same wavelength here. So you're doing a lot of good things in the world. What have you been up to today?
Well, the first thing for me is always self-care, and we can't do much for other people and the world around us if we're depleted. And I know that I have this big nonprofit. We do a lot of research. We do a lot of treatment, like with veterans and other people who are suffering. Right now, we have a program, for example, to get some really solid evidence-based techniques to people who are treating refugees from Ukraine. And so there's always all of that stuff out there. I have my training company to run. But if I am not balanced myself, I really have very little to offer other people. I'll be running on fumes. So I wake up in the morning. And one of the cool things about that meditation you did, Joe, is it's addictive. You do it for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days, and it produces such spikes in hormones and neurotransmitters like dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, all these feel good neurotransmitters that you really get to the point where you can't live without it. And see, I wake up in the morning, I just want to meditate more than anything else. I do that first. That's the basis, the frame for my day. And from there, I go and do everything else. Do I have problems? Absolutely. Do I have challenges in my life? Like everyone else. But I've started the day that way. And that's what I do for myself every single day.
And are you using the eco meditation that's on the website?
I am, because I'm a rotten meditator. Even after 50 years of doing it on and off, and then for the last 22 years, every single day, I still have trouble quieting my mind, and everyone has trouble quieting their mind. And so eco meditation is just a simple series of physiological cues like heart coherence from heart math, EFT tapping. Then we used to throw in some self-hypnosis, some mindful breathing, neurofeedback, and just some very simple mechanical things you do with your body, your breath, your posture. And suddenly, if you just do those simple things, you send the signal to your body to go into deep but alert relaxation. And so I do it myself every day.
And before you get out of bed, or do you get out of bed, have coffee, and go sit in a chair and do it?
I could not do it without my coffee. So coffee make stumble downstairs, bleary-eyed, hit on the coffee maker, take a cup of coffee, go meditate.
Now we are friends for life, because I was really afraid you were going to say, no, I don't drink coffee and I do the meditation first. And I'm like, I got to have the coffee first. That's
hearing a guru about 30 years ago, and he was talking about the spiritual journey. I thought, oh, this sounds so wonderful. I was just hooked on this amazing saint from India, and sitting there in the audience, just blissed out, hearing him. And then he got to the list of things you had to give up.
Right.
Meat,
right.
coffee, alcohol. Half his disciples were celibate in their marriages and supposed to, be with my wife and not have sex. My heart just sank, Joe, as I realized I was never going to be that kind of a pure person. So
No wonder you became an author and science writer. You're going to go in a different direction.
Yeah.
There's so many things I want to ask you about, and we won't have enough time to get to them all. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go for the throat. I need to know a few things, and I think the people watching need to know this, or the people listening need to know this. Your one book in particular is Mind to Matter, and the subtitle, which I didn't say, is The Astonishing Science of How Our Brain Creates Material Reality. All right, here it is. Dawson, the world sucks. Right now, you mentioned Ukraine, that Russia's bombing Ukraine over there. I got friends in both places. The COVID is still going on, as far as I know, and people are still in different levels practicing the pandemic safeguards there. People are still dealing with resignation, whether they have been fired, laid off, or chose to leave their jobs. There is confusion, there is uncertainty, there is economic instability. People are concerned about the future. They are shaking in their boots. And here they come to a show called Zero Limits Living. And part of them is going, oh, come on, Joe, look where we're at. So I have you on this show with a book said Mind to Matter, and we can create our reality. Dawson, how?
Well, I was a real skeptic when I began doing the research, looking at the research that went into that book. And my wife is a follower of Abraham, and she listens to Abraham in the car all the time, listens to Abraham in various places. And so I was exposed to Abraham many, many years ago, over and over and over again. And I thought, oh, what a sweet, quaint, new age idea. Our thoughts create our reality. I'm a hard science guy. I don't really believe that. So I began to piece together the evidence for this. And I was amazed when I wrote the book that I could show every single link in the chain from thought to thing. So the book covers two dimensions of thoughts to things. One is really easy to comprehend, and that's how our minds, our consciousness, our awareness creates molecules. Just for example, if I get stressed, I send a signal through my HPA axis, my cortisol, my adrenaline immediately rise. Now, if I am, say, for example, in a situation that's tense, maybe I'm walking through a bad part of town, maybe I am in a near miss on the freeway, and then appropriately my adrenaline rises and my cortisol goes up. But if I describe that scene to my wife later in the day when I'm totally safe, my cortisol and adrenaline goes up as well. And I managed to raise my adrenaline, raise my cortisol purely with thought. So in our bodies, we're creating over 100,000 different molecules in our bodies every second. A lot of them are shifting based on our thoughts. And it's just really obvious that when we do good things, think of things, we lower cortisol, we raise DHEA. In the meditation, on one eco meditation study we did, we were amazed. I did this long before COVID. And we had people at a workshop, and we measured their immune systems before and after. And we found that in a weekend of doing this, Joe, one weekend, their immunoglobulins, which are the first line of defense against coronaviruses, their immunoglobulins in their saliva, their nasal passages, their ears, their eyes, their immunoglobulins rose by 37% in a weekend. That's how powerful we are at creating things like immunity in our bodies. But the second half of the book moves into how we create things outside of ourselves. How do we create stuff out there? And it's not like a magical ability we have to create things that shouldn't be there. I mean, I can't think there's going to be a $5 million yacht parked in my driveway, and then that's just going to materialize. It's not like that. That's why the book's called Mind to Matter. And what I advocate in the book is meditation, that you lose your clinging to local reality, your local self, and do what the masters do. The great spiritual masters are able to merge with the universe, with the all that is, in non-local reality. Then there's only one consciousness, and you're one with that one consciousness. That one consciousness creates through you. So now I'm doing a series of studies on business productivity, and we're finding that business productivity rises. In one study of McKinsey executives, it rose fivefold. Creativity more than doubled. The ability to solve complicated problems, according to a big study by DARPA, the US Defense Agency, went up 5 times when people were in these states of flow. So what we find is that we're not only creating things inside our bodies, when we are in that state of oneness with the universe, we are incredibly influential outside of ourselves as well.
And that's interesting. I've been studying the Stoics. I had gone through everything from deaths of parents to a divorce to, of course, COVID and everything. And part of what I was looking for was a life raft. And Stoicism kind of showed up as a life preserver. And one of the things that they teach is knowing the limits of what you can control. And for them, thousands of years ago, it was like nothing outside of you for the most part. And what I'm hearing from you, and I think I'm reading this correctly, is that you do have some control over the outside.
You do.
Am I correct?
Yeah. And so at the end of Mind to Matter, I have a whole chapter on outside events. And for example, in work done at Princeton University, they show that when they look at big social upheavals like Vietnam War protests and the Women's March in 2016, these global events are producing changes in the field, and they use random number generators to determine this. So yeah, absolutely, we are able collectively to do that. And then at the end of that chapter, there's a whole series of studies there, but the cool graph I have is of solar activity, solar flares that happen over the course of 30 days. And so there are solar flares, sometimes they're big ones, sometimes they're small ones, sometimes for a few days the sun is pretty quiet, but this changes the electromagnetic signature of the Earth, because the solar wind rushes by at about 2 million miles an hour, going really, really fast, distorts the planet's field. And so there are these fluctuations in the field, and we've been measuring them for a century in geology. So it's a map of 1 month, 30 days of those fluctuations. Below that is a map of the heart coherence of a group of people that are in heart coherence. They're in this deep state that eco meditation puts you in. And you just watch the two graphs, and they look like this. You could lay one on top of the other, and they're day by day almost identical. These people are attuned to, they are in sync with these huge solar system wide events. And so that's how we get in sync with each other. If I'm in sync with those events and you're in sync with those events, and somebody in Tokyo is in sync with them and somebody in Johannesburg is in sync with them, we're all in sync. And that's why suddenly that friend from Johannesburg phones you after they haven't talked to you for 14 years and gives you the exact piece of information you need for the project you're working on now. So synchronicity happens to people like this. In one giant study of meditators, they found that they have more synchronicity, more clairvoyance, more psychokinesis, more clairsentience, more intuition, more of all this stuff because they're getting in sync with those global cycles. So it's not mind to matter trying to manipulate stuff outside of you. It's getting in sync with the all that is, being one with all of consciousness, and then you are one with everyone else who is one with all of consciousness, and you have a much less bumpy road through life.
This is fascinating. What I think I'm hearing is that you're talking about group meditation. You're talking about people being aligned and practicing pretty similar techniques in order to influence the outer. Is this correct? Before I go on.
Well, you want to practice some form of meditation. And in Bliss Brain, I have 7 categories of meditation, and
Mhm.
find one that works for you. Like for some people, they just love moving styles of meditation like yoga and Tai
Mhm.
Chi and Qigong. Other
Mhm.
people want something that's really focused, like counting breaths. Some will use following thought. Others will use time and nature. So just experiment with what puts you different things for different people into those coherent states.
Okay, but that's talking about the individual. Are we talking about the individual's practice right now? Or are you talking about the individuals practicing with people who are doing the same kind of practice?
You don't have to know what other people are doing. When you enter those coherent
Ah,
states, you're entering that same one consciousness with everybody else in that state.
okay. That's a good clarification. Now, I have another thing I need clarified on here. Your book says the astonishing science of how our brain creates material reality. That throws me off. I didn't think my brain did it.
Yes.
I thought my mind did it.
Yeah.
And so, is it the brain? Is it the mind? Is it something else?
Yeah. That's a very good question, Joe. And so, what function does the brain have? In the medieval times, they couldn't figure it out. They thought maybe it had to do with cooling the blood. They couldn't figure out what function the brain had in our lives. And
Right.
so, uh, the conceit of science, we're very materialistically oriented. We get sick, we want a pill, we want surgery, we want some sort of external intervention. But energy is powerful at shifting our bodies, and so our scientific material society has has had this idea that consciousness arises from the brain, and the idea is that as evolution produced more and more complicated brains, eventually this thing called consciousness kind of happened. But there's no scientific evidence for that whatsoever. And it looks much more, when you look at what the evidence is, look at near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, the enormous amount of evidence there is for psi effects. It looks much more like what the brain does really effectively is it transduces information from these non-local fields and translates it into material reality. And so there's our individual local mind. I think locally. I think about the spreadsheet I'm working on now. I think about data. I think about what I'm going to make for dinner. I'm going to think about what time my wife gets home. I'm thinking about all these things at the local level. And then there's the non-local level. And so we can move into that non-local level of mind. And so when we do that, we're then downloading these ideas through our brains. So our brain is a conduit for
Mm.
that. You want to have a healthy brain, you want to have an effective brain, but what it's doing is transducing that. Albert Einstein said that every great scientific discovery is made in an altered state. Napoleon Hill, in chapter 15 of his book Think and Grow Rich, talks about how he just could not solve problems, and neither could his clients at that lateral local level. But when he would pull in what he called his invisible counsel, he'd go into altered states of consciousness where he was calling upon all of these geniuses of the past, and then downloading that information, he could solve unsolvable problems. So that's where creativity comes from. That's where insight comes from. That's where wisdom comes from. And when we let go of our own little local self and tune in there, we have access to the information fields of the universe.
This is exciting. You know, I have my own invisible counsel. I wrote a book on P.T. Barnum, the circus giant. And most people don't know that he was this creative genius. He had been a politician, he was an author, he was a speaker, he was a publicist, he was an entertainer, and he's part of my advisors. And some of his ideas are pretty preposterous, but but, but I allow them in. When these ideas come in and they're coming in through the brain, who's making a decision about them?
Well, ultimately, it is always you. You can't subcontract out your life path to anyone else. It's basically you, and you get this information. And just for example, I found that the information I get from that dimension of things about highly material things like time and money is
Mhm.
often really spacey. It's like getting from some Tibetan monk who's never bought anything in his life, or never been married, or never had to meet a deadline. You know, they say like you know, for when I was single many years ago before I met my wife, I'd say I want to find this person. And I visualized I on my vision board, and I affirmed I had this person in my life. I did all the right things, and just year after year, it didn't show up. And so often we're doing that. We're cut off at this local level, and we're not really tuned in to that other level. So I found that and again the you know the wisdom you get, guidance you get is that, oh, this person's there. Absolutely. She's in your life right now. And it took a long time for her to show up because they don't seem to have a very good, I mean, that's not the universe of material finite things like time and money. And so their statistics and their, don't count on that level of knowing for managing your investment fund.
All right. Well, okay. Well, this is, I got to put your feet in the fire because I don't have much time with you. And at the same time, I'm a very practical guy. And I'm also a guy who's trying to serve all the people that are tuning in to our show, Zero Limits Living. And so, what I need to know this, Dawson. How do we create the reality we prefer? Give me the dumbed down version of how we do this, and we can make up something. If there's somebody right now who's watching and it's a single mom who's got two kids, she's out of work, worried about where's the money going to come from, where's the job going to come from. So maybe she's going to focus on finances, and she's hearing about mind the matter and bliss brain, and we know about the eco meditation and this, that, and the other. What specifically would you advise her to do?
I would advise you to do all the things I did when I wanted that thing, and that thing was my wife.
Mhm.
Um, but you then have to get into the feeling state, get into the body state of already having it. Now, this sounds paradoxical, but you don't have it right now, and yet you have to attune yourself to the feeling of already having it. When you have that sense of already having it, then your brain is starting to fire those neural pathways. And as we know, neurons that fire together wire together. Now you're building a neural network of being able to perceive that thing you want, which you didn't before. Like one woman I talk about in one of my books, she was a therapist friend of mine, and this woman wanted a relationship. So she went to this therapist friend and she said, I want a relationship. But she had this belief, this client had this belief that all the good men are taken. And she just time after time stumbled, didn't get the relationship she wanted. One day, after my therapist friend had worked with her using these techniques for a few weeks, this woman bounded into the office for her appointment in person. She said, I found this guy. He's fabulous. And he checked off all the boxes that she had, what she wanted in a mate. And so my therapist friend asked her, where did you meet him? And the woman said, at work. And then the therapist said, well, just in terms of the layout of the office, where does he work? And the client said, 2 cubicles away. And how long have you worked near him, 2 cubicles away? And the client said, about 6 months. So think about this, Joe. She's with Mr. Right. Oh, and by the way, they did get married, had a really successful long-term marriage after that. So she's met Mr. Right. She's been working 2 cubicles away from him for 6 months, and she can't see him. Why? Because she has a belief. And the belief is
Mm.
all the good men are taken. It's our beliefs that are preventing us. So for that single mom, I'd say it's not there right now. You have to activate the neurophysiology of having it already now. Breathe, believe it, feel it. You then build the neural pathways. You then can see Mr. Right sitting 2 cubicles away.
I love this. Now, you probably know who Neville Goddard was,
Yeah,
the mystic, and he said, "Assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled," which was his way of saying, assume that what you want is already in your life and feel it real. And I had recorded a song called Feel It Real with the statement of that. But you also said about the beliefs. And I'm a big guy when it comes to belief because I've found that beliefs are what's stopping us. Are you suggesting that feeling that end result will override the negative beliefs, the limiting beliefs?
you have to find out where they come from. And one of the things research shows us is you can't transcend trauma. So that's why I teach
Mm,
EFT tapping. And
mm.
when I was dreadfully miserable as a teenager, 13, 14 years old, I went and joined a spiritual community. And the teaching there was we just move to this transcendent place in meditation and through ecstatic worship where all those problems are not, and the old identity is no longer there, so it's not suffering anymore. And research shows that that is completely not true. It does not work that way. You have
Wow.
to go and dig into your trauma and you have to resolve it. So I teach EFT. I work with traumatized people. I do PTSD research. We're working now with the VA to bring EFT into veterans hospitals, veterans centers to deal with the trauma. So you have to do that first. There's no free pass. You can't just go and be in those states and not deal with all of the stuff in the basement. I mean, it just research shows you get there that you can get there, but you have to deal with the stuff in the basement. If you don't, it becomes the dark side, the shadow.
Wow. Well, you said something profound there when you said you cannot transcend trauma. That's a big statement. So, what do we do? EFT. Do you want to define it? I think my viewers know what it is, but they may not. So, if you want to give a definition.
Yeah, EFT is tapping on acupuncture points. There are 13 spots we tap, and this very, very rapidly regulates your brain. We have many studies using MRIs and EEGs, and all the fear centers of the brain just shut down when you start tapping within a few seconds. It doesn't take a long time, it doesn't even take a couple of minutes, it takes just a few seconds. When you start tapping while you're processing a fearful memory or event or belief, your limbic system just shuts down. You go back to normal. So EFT is tapping on acupuncture points while you think about the worst stuff. I mean, you're thinking about trauma. We work with tons of veterans from Afghanistan and Iraq and Vietnam, and they're thinking about, I mean, things that are so like
Yeah.
one young man I told, he was in the Battle of Fallujah in 2004, Joe, and he was a medic. And one of the jobs he got was to clean the uniform of a friend of his who'd been killed. And this uniform had been in the Iraqi sun for 4 days. It smelled terrible. And this kid in his 20s was literally having to run outside, hyperventilate, get air, then run back into the hut, clean the uniform a little bit, and then run back outside to get fresh air because the thing smelled so bad. And it was his friend. And so his trauma was 10 out of 10. We measure these trauma scores beforehand. After I tapped with him, it went down to 0 out of 10. I met him a few months later, it was still 0 out of 10. And he then said to me, I'm glad I got the job of cleaning his uniform before we shipped back to his parents back in the US because I love this guy and I'm glad I do that job. So it went from being a tragedy in his mind to being an act of service in his mind. And we can shift that way when we are doing the tapping. It really changes the way we see the world and ourselves.
No, this is beautiful, Dawson. So I'm creating a formula in my head here. So I want you to tell me if I'm doing it right. So we're going back to the woman she's unemployed, she's got a couple kids, divorced,
Yeah,
separated, whatever, and so she's got to focus on feeling it real, having the wealth or the money or a job. As she's doing that, if a negative belief, if a trauma, a memory comes up in her awareness, that's when she would do the tapping.
absolutely. Whenever you
And
feel
by
anything pulling you off track, tap. Yeah.
and then by tapping, she will reduce it, eliminate it, remove it altogether, or just take the charge off of it, maybe. So the story's there, but the trauma isn't there. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
and then that frees for what happens then. Is there a magic that takes place where suddenly, well, I'm going to get the job now? I focused on it. I felt it real. I got rid of my trauma, and now behold what takes
Well,
place.
first of all, it doesn't take long. So when we work with veterans with PTSD, again, these are people with severe chronic PTSD, flashbacks, nightmares, intrusive thoughts, hypervigilance. 6 1-hour sessions, Joe, that's what it takes to clear that. We have these veterans coming into our free program, the Veteran Stress Solution. They get 6 sessions and they walk out the door and those symptoms are gone in 9 out of 10 of them. Not 10 out of 10, but 9 out of 10 of them. And there are many randomized controlled trials showing this. So that's what she does. She clears trauma, and it's not going to take her 10 years or 10,000 hours. It's going to take her just a systemic approach to shifting it. Then when you are no longer under that burden of trauma and living your whole life that way, and by the way, if you're in that traumatic state, you are recreating your future out of your past. That all changes. Now she can start to have positive brain function, and her affirmations start to stick because they're no longer these traumatic parts of her that are sabotaging her well-being. So now her potential starts to come out. She's feeling it in her body. She's feeling the feeling of having that thing, and she's firing those brain pathways. And now she's aware of opportunities she wasn't before. I
Mm.
remember I once had this happen with a friend of mine who was I was working with him on something, and I was upset about things going on. I did some tapping. I suddenly had this thought about something I could do with one of his programs. I did that thing the next day, and it made $18,000 that week. Now I would never have seen that if I was all wrapped up in the in the
Very
worry.
good.
So you see opportunities you don't when you're stuck in your old belief patterns.
Yeah. What about going through COVID for you personally? You've been running a business for a while, and then COVID pandemic hits. Probably like me, you're traveling and you're speaking, and all that probably shut down. What did you do to come up with a new dance step?
Yeah, well, we had just at the end of 2019 moved all of our courses, and we have a big certification program certifying people in EFT. We just finished moving it virtual, just finished just before COVID. And I was doing a class in China remotely. I was doing it by Zoom in January of 2020, and I could tell something was really wrong with the people
Hmm.
taking my class. And then, we began to hear more and more about COVID, and then we had to develop a response to it. So we, for example, did a meditation that built in all of the research we've done showing that you can boost immunoglobulin. If immunoglobulin is what these molecules are called, I don't want to get too technical here, but these are the molecules that bind to the spike on a coronavirus and neutralize them so the coronavirus can't attach to the cells. They're called immunoglobulins. We can measure them in all the mucous membranes of the body. And so we found the research we'd done, analyzed our own research, and then built it into a meditation, which we began to give out free. And it was translated into something like 14 languages. It's gone out to hundreds of thousands of people. So we began to do things of service like that. I went and did some workshops where I taught people how to do this virtually. And so we really tried to make an impact on the situation. And we actually wound up as an organization faring okay during COVID. We didn't lose any people. We were able to maintain our income. We were able to keep up our charitable work, even though it was a big shift. So it's been a big global trauma.
Yeah.
We've all been through it, and there are lessons to harvest. Like, ask yourself, like, Joe, you traveled less. Well, do you want to travel as much as you were traveling before?
Oh no, I was actually looking for a time off. I, I was in Russia, I was in Ukraine, I was in Iran, and then we had pandemic, and I was kind of like, I'm okay with that. I'm okay
Yeah.
with not with the pandemic, but I was okay with staying home.
Yeah. And now, like, when you look at your plans for next year, I mean, maybe you're just really planning consciously when and where you'll travel.
Right. You mentioned that audio that you made to help people with their immunity. Is that available still? Is that on the EFTuniverse.com site or somewhere else?
It is there, and to get to it quickly, go to the domain name, just Dawson, my name, Dawson, and then gift com, and we put it right up at the top of the page there so people can get that free meditation quickly. It's about 22 minutes long. And Joe, one of the cool things we found in our research now, we have a study coming out in a big neuroscience journal in a couple of months, but we had people do that meditation for a month, and we found that the anatomical structure of their brains began to change. The literal anatomy of their brain wiring began to change. And the part of the brain that is most responsible for suffering, it's right over here between our eyes. It's called the default mode network. And a big node of it, the mid-prefrontal cortex, is right here. We found that people doing eco meditation for a month, that part of the brain just went dialed way down. And the compassion part of the brain dialed way up. And so even when these people were not meditating, that changed brain function was present in their anatomy. So it literally is changing your brain structure, reducing suffering and increasing compassion in just a month.
I love that. I love it. And I love what you're doing. I love your books. I love all of your work. You're one of the light workers making a difference. And I appreciate that, Dawson. Thank you. I have to ask you about science. I get really upset when people worship science. They worship science as the new religion. Science says, and then they bow to whatever it is, and they don't seem to look at the long view of it, where somebody does a scientific study that says one thing, and somebody else does a scientific study that vetoes what that one said, and both of them are worshiping. And then if science actually all agreed on their findings, we wouldn't have all these people arguing about the science. And I was relieved to see it. I don't know which book it was at this point, but you were talking about science is based on belief. Science is based on belief.
How I structure an experiment is based on belief. How I interpret the results is based on belief. There's a ton of belief in science. I have one funny story in Mind to Matter about a lab at MIT. And so at this lab at MIT, their grad students who work there, when they come in, they have to do certain tasks to prove that they're worthy of their degree. And one of those tasks is they have to precipitate crystals out of a super saturated solution. And it's really hard to do. They often spend many failed attempts, learning how to precipitate these crystals out of the solution. And so I heard the story from the lab director. And so this one new student started there. And the first day, he was all alone in the lab that day, and she walked in, and he had precipitated the crystals out of the supersaturated solution the very first day. She was like, "How did you do that? That's so hard. Many people spend months trying to figure it out." He said, "Oh, I didn't know it was hard. I just knew you had to do it here in the lab, so I just came in here and did it." So even hard science, and the double slit experiment, the observer effect, we've known about this for 200 years, that observation changes the results of reality. So now one filter with which to look at science is that when do we have definite science and when do we have exploratory science? Climate change, for example, we didn't have a lot of hard data in 1970, 1980. We had a fair amount by 1990. We had lots by 2000. So we accumulate data. And after a while, we know about things like gravity and about most functionings of the body. So it takes a while to do that. But the way science evolves is that we notice that something exists or something occurs first, and only later on do we figure out how it occurs. Aspirin, 100-year lag between knowing that willow bark reduced pain to knowing the mechanisms of action. Penicillin, 34 years. So it takes a while to figure out. Even tapping, there's about 10 years between us knowing that tapping worked and knowing how it worked epigenetically. So science is evolving. And then there are things that science gets really clear about over time.
Yeah, I usually say that science comes up with findings, not absolutes.
Yes.
For the most part, they give us glimpses. So this is a more confrontational question for you. So allow me to play a little bit. And it's given in love and compassion. And the question is, if science is based on belief, and most of the scientists are actually trying to discover something that they already believe is true, and I know that's a wide, general, sweeping statement, how does this play with your own research? You are a science writer. You have written numerous books besides the ones I listed and besides the ones I've got here beside me. There was books that you've done a long time ago. You are basing all of those on different science. How much of your science is based on I want this to be true.
It's based on consciousness. I'll give you a really good example. I was doing a lot of research 15 years ago on PTSD because I wanted to help these people suffering from flashbacks and nightmares. So I was very focused on that. I was also measuring anxiety and depression. So I was very focused on psychology. What I was not at all focused on was physiology. I wasn't measuring anything to do with their bodies. I realized, well, when cortisol drops, it produces effect on the body. So I began to ask different scientific questions. Now I was asking about psychology and physiology, but we were missing a lot of this stuff early on because we weren't asking the right questions. Was I missing next? I was missing everything about spirituality. I did not understand. I think go back just as far as 1995, we just did not understand in science how potent the effect of spirituality is. That study I did, where in a weekend of eco meditation and tapping, people's immunoglobulins rise by 37%, just having spiritual experiences. We had no idea that spirituality was producing massive effects on the body. Now we know it is. So we were asking questions from our limited consciousness, getting the answers to those questions. But there were all kinds of things that we just weren't asking about. Now, Joe, I'm asking about those. I'm measuring those. I'm going to be releasing a whole bunch of studies in the next year that do ask about things like non-dual states, moving into these states that the masters are in, transcendent states. But then the coolest thing I'm doing now for the next phase of research, so I've got all my data from transcendent states, which takes a few years to work through it all and publish it in peer-reviewed journals. But now I'm asking myself, okay, so these people are being one with the universe, they're feeling amazing, they're meditating, they're entering this non-local mind. What's happening to their business productivity? What's happening
Yes.
to their problem solving ability? What's
Yes.
happening to their relationships? And so I don't know. So I was asking, I was doing the best I could at the time, but now I'm asking for these highly spiritual people, are they just lost out there in Never Never Land, or are they more effective in the real world? I don't know yet.
Yeah, I have my own stories about that, but I don't want to waste time talking about me. What I want to know is this show is called Zero Limits Living. Do we have any limits?
In terms of brain development, we haven't found them yet. One study showing very experienced meditators against less experienced ones found that even after 40,000 hours of meditation, your brain keeps changing. I know for me, Joe, my happiness level from being such a miserable teenager, I wanted to commit suicide. I was just suicidal pretty much throughout my teenage years. And
Mm.
then getting a little bit happier when I joined the spiritual community and learned meditation and other things. And getting a little bit happy as I learned Gestalt therapy and get a little bit happier bit by bit by bit in my life. And then finally began to hit these states of bliss. And then looking at the research on these monks and nuns, they are entering states of ecstasy that ordinary people do not know exist. And when we look at their MRI and EEG signatures, they're hitting like 7 times the upper limit for most people in terms of the ecstatic brain waves we're seeing in their brains. I mean, that's like Steph Curry, who's on the local basketball team here near where I live. He jumps a yard in the air. He just jumps 1 yard in the air. And I tell you, if Steph Curry jumps a yard in the air, you say an amazing athlete. If I told you Steph Curry jumps 7 yards in the air, he could jump over a building, you'd say no way. But that's the kind of happiness level we're seeing in people who do meditation and who are really on this path. So most people are living at that level. They're hoping to jump 1 yard in the air like Steph Curry.
Mm.
They have no idea there's a sevenfold increase available past that point. We are living in such a tiny fraction of our abilities. If there's one thing that bothers me, Joe, and things do bother me, is that people have such limited visions of their life, and they
Mm.
could be living in way higher levels of gratitude, awe, sense of beauty, consciousness, all of these things. And they're just stuck there and they're telling themselves these tragic stories. And I just want to find the ways of loving them into a much bigger vision and saying, you can jump over a building.
I love it, and you're doing your work. You're making a difference by what you're doing. I wanted to ask. You mentioned earlier about the $5 million yacht that was not in your driveway or in the wherever you're at, water behind you. And can you have the $5 million yacht by doing what you've been talking about, whether it is the meditation or all of these things, whether it's the meditation, the feeling it real, handling whatever trauma is around limiting beliefs or yachts or money? What would be your answer?
Yes, but. My answer is yes, but.
Yes, but.
When you've reached that manifestational level of being one with the universe, and again, we see that people's ability to manifest increases dramatically in that space, you can manifest the $5 million yacht, and the you that wanted a $5 million yacht will no longer be there.
That is a
Sorry to say
beautiful.
that, but
No, I got it. I got it. I got it. That is so beautiful. You know, the teachers that I have known or read of that were allegedly enlightened, and they did have Rolls Royce, and they did fly in a private jet, and they did have a yacht. The thing that I noticed that is they didn't own them. They had access to them, and somebody else owned it or gave it to them or ran it for them. So there is something there about the spiritual awakening or the rising of consciousness to be able to be in a $5 million yacht, but you're not attached to it.
not at
You
all.
don't actually even own it. That could be the loophole. A different question for you, and this is, I've been waiting for somebody to give me a really clear definition of the word spirituality. I remember Gene Simmons of Kiss saying he was not spiritual. And he said the reason why, nobody has been able to tell him what spirituality actually was. So he believed in only one sign, the dollar sign. I'm asking you, what is your definition of spirituality?
Spirituality is simply the ability to release attachment to your local reality and become one with non-local reality. Everyone has that ability. It is something we do all the time. If you see a beautiful sunset, you hold a baby in your arms, you're listening to a symphony, you're watching the fireworks, you're making love, you're reading an inspiring book, listening to your favorite piece of music, and suddenly you're just out there, one with the all that is. And so spirituality is the ability to let go of our little local selves. And as I do this, Joe, I'm shrinking and
Right.
hunching over here. And so you don't want to live at that level. We need to do things at that level and be effective at that level, drive on the right side of the road. But you want to let go of that level and just merge with non-local reality. And that's what I call spiritual intelligence, is the ability to tune in to that larger part of life. And when you do that, you know that consciousness is one, you know that your local consciousness is one with non-local consciousness. And suddenly there isn't anything in the universe that isn't part of this dance of consciousness. You're simply one with the all that is, and it all falls into place. And the kinds of bliss we measure in people's brains and minds and lives and body function in these states is extraordinary. Like they're literally, they got so much dopamine and serotonin flowing through their brains. They're completely blissed out. And that's the potential for all of us as we live a spiritual life, use our spiritual intelligence to become one with the all it is, and then start to get to bring that all down into our local reality.
That's beautiful. In the last few minutes I have with you, let me ask you a couple random but maybe hard hitting questions. And one of them is, what is the question you feared I was going to ask?
Joe, my biggest fear was that you were going to ask me what question I was afraid you were going to ask.
What is the question you were hoping I would ask and I never got around to it? What is the question you wanted me to ask?
Well, I wanted you to ask questions that would allow me to illuminate the potential that we all have to be happy. Because again, I was living in a very small box most of my life, much of my life, and now I'm living in a much bigger box in terms of happiness. My set point, my happiness is much higher. And so I was wanting you to ask things that would let people know that they can be enormously happier than they are
Mm.
today, and hopefully motivate them to that goal.
Well, the tools you're offering, like at your EFT universe, EFTuniverse.com, like the eco meditation. Those will all help in that direction. Do you have any last words?
Love yourself, forgive yourself, live where you are, accept the way your life is, fill yourself with self-love, and do those things it'll take to give yourself a good life. And the excuses you've got are really just stopping you from being in that place. And we all sense we can be great. We have greatness inside of us. That sense is because we do have greatness inside of us. And the only variable is, are you going to step up and accept it? Will you let go of your limitations? Will you be in that space of greatness, which you can choose to be in every single day, and then live an outer life that's a reflection of that?
Yeah. Which book would you recommend people start with if they're new to you and they're engaged at this point and fascinated?
Start with Mind to Matter, I think.
Hmm.
That really is a good overview of the evidence for mind's great reality. Bliss brain is about these exquisite states we get into when we activate these parts of our brains. And it's really extraordinary. The drugs we produce, like serotonin, has the same molecular structure as psilocybin, magic mushrooms. So you're making magic mushrooms, psilocybin in your brain. Anandamide has the same structure as THC, marijuana. So you're making these extraordinary drugs inside your own brain, and they're rising a lot when you make them, so you feel really good. So Bliss Brain is all about those ecstatic states.
You are absolutely fascinating. Can we have a continuation at some point?
Love
Can we have
to.
a part two?
Absolutely. We just
And
got
then I'll
scratched the
ask
surface,
then I'll
Joe.
ask the questions you've been fearing.
Well, you want some time to think of some better ones.
I've been talking to Dawson Church, who is a world-renowned scientist. He's written Mind to Matter and numerous other books. Go to his website, eftuniverse.com, explore it, download the meditation he has there, and start using it every morning. Have your coffee, have your meditation, and then go and have an exploratory, miraculous day. I'm Dr. Joe Vitale. You've been listening to Zero Limits Living TV. Every week, I bring you inspiration and information to transform your life. You can have, do, and be pretty much anything you can imagine. So think big. I want to thank everybody for making this show so popular. It's now seen or heard on 1,000 different platforms, including Roku and Amazon and Apple and YouTube. Go to ZeroLimitsLivingTV.com to see all the episodes. Remember to check out Miracles Coaching, get a free consultation, miraclescoaching.com. I want to thank Lux Media, Candace Barr for making this possible, Chris for making us look good behind the cameras there, and you for watching. Go out there and expect miracles.
Glutathione is a big word. It's the body's own master antioxidant. It's a scavenger for free radical, bacteria, and viruses. There are no products in the market with the ingredient NASET. NASET increases the production of glutathione that's in our body already to strengthen and enhance our immune system, elevate sense of well-being, support muscle strength and endurance, cognitive function, and liver support. It helps with increased energy and blood sugar regulation. Get your bottle of GSH Plus from www.salvationnutra.com.